It was an ordinary day. Peppa's math teacher, Madame Gusel, started coming to her house. At first, Peppa enjoyed studying with her. However, after a few days, Peppa became thin and sad. Her parents started to worry.
Peppa, you must eat.
Mama Pig insisted. But Peppa didn't want anything except math.
Please, call Madame Gusel.
Her parents obeyed their daughter's request. Peppa looked worse and worse. Madame Gusel sat with her in the room and taught her mathematics. Suddenly, she pulled out a pink stone. Peppa's pupils disappeared, and she floated up as if hypnotized.
Math is your life, Peppa,
said Madame Gusel with a sinister smile. Meanwhile, her parents had no idea what was happening. They were sitting in the living room watching TV.
What an interesting movie,
said Daddy Pig. A few days later, Peppa could no longer walk or talk.
Why isn't she getting better?
Mama Pig asked, wiping tears from her eyes. One day, Mama Pig saw Madame Gusel smiling menacingly, holding a stone over Peppa.
What is going on here?
Shouted Mama Pig.
Get out of here, Madame Gusel,
said Daddy Pig, looking at her with suspicion. The room darkened. Madame Gusel transformed into a terrible monster that only said one thing.
Math will take over the world. Bow to it.
A cold wind blew. Everything around turned into a tornado of notebooks and numbers. In the morning, everyone sat at the table with crazy faces. They were solving problems while Madame Gusel loomed over them as if controlling their minds. Peppa and her family were living their usual lives, playing, laughing, and enjoying themselves. Peppa was in her room and George was building a tower with blocks. Everything felt calm, peaceful. That day, Peppa started to feel strange. She complained about a sharp pain in her chest, like being stabbed with a knife, but everyone thought it was just a cold. But as time passed, her condition grew worse. What started as a simple cold became something more terrifying. Peppa could feel her body weakening. Her parents quickly called the doctor. Soon, Peppa was in the hospital. The doctor said it was serious and they began intensive treatment. Injections, pain, long nights where Peppa couldn't sleep, only silence and the steady drip of the IV. But one night in the corner of the hospital room, a figure appeared. A blurry shadow. Grandpa. Peppa didn't understand. Why was he there? Why was he staring at her like that, with empty, lifeless eyes? He sat in the corner, silent. His face didn't look like Grandpa's anymore. There was no warmth, only something cold and frightening. And in his hand, a knife. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just stared. But Peppa felt it. Something was very, very wrong. Then, one night, as Peppa struggled with the pain, everything changed. Her body went cold. It wasn't the fever, it was something else, something unnatural. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, she woke up. She was back in her room, but everything felt off. She told her parents about her nightmares, about Grandpa and the knife. But they didn't believe her. Their faces looked strange, pale, expressionless. They told her it was just a dream. But the nightmares kept coming. And each time she slept, Grandpa's shadow returned, watching her. Then came the day when she understood. It wasn't a dream. None of it was. She was back in the hospital. Only this time the room was darker. Her parents sat by the bed, silent, terrified. The doctor said her condition had worsened. Peppa was suffocating. And in that moment she understood. Her death had already happened. Peppa's parents stand quietly beside a small grave. No wow words, only wind. Grandpa sits behind bars. His face is filled with regret. He was responsible for the death of his own granddaughter. A police officer leans in and asks, "Why did you kill your granddaughter with a knife?" Grandpa stays silent. He cannot answer. He sits alone, locked away for what he did. There are no words that can explain such cruelty. He just stares at the screen. His eyes are wide and empty. It was an ordinary day. Peppa saw a new game on Daddy Pig's computer called Coin Collection. She started collecting coins, and everything seemed fun and harmless. At first, Peppa enjoyed the game, but day by day, she became more absorbed and lost track of time. Soon, dark circles appeared under her eyes, and the joy disappeared. One sunny day, Mommy Pig was tidying up toys in the nursery. She hadn't seen Peppa for a while and decided to check on her. Mommy Pig entered the room to turn off the computer, but what she saw shocked her. Peppa was sitting in her chair with wires connected to her head.
Mom, I'm almost at the final level.
Peppa exclaimed, her eyes clouded. Mommy Pig rushed to disconnect the wires, but as soon as she reached for them, Peppa raised her hand. Another wire appeared out of nowhere and plunged into Mommy Pig's neck. Soon she found herself next to Peppa, absorbed in the screen. Meanwhile, George and Daddy Pig were watching a show about Mr. Potato in the living room. George asked where Peppa was. Daddy Pig shrugged. George decided to check what was happening in the room. He entered and saw Peppa and Mama connected to the computer. He stood there, overwhelmed with fear, but before he could do anything, a wire shot into his neck as well. He too fell under the influence of the game. Daddy Pig also grew bored, sitting alone in the room, so he went to call the family for an evening movie. He entered the room and saw that everyone was now playing. Deciding to stop this madness, he turned off the computer. However, the screen still flickered on. Suddenly, a wire shot forward and connected to Daddy Pig's neck. He froze. His eyes clouded over, and he too succumbed to the game. Suddenly, the lights went out. Now the entire family sat on the sofa in the living room with empty eyes. Wires protruded from their necks. The TV flickered ominously, showing a terrible grimace. Grandpa brought the family an old television. It looked strange, but it immediately turned on. It was showing memories, happy and familiar. But sometimes there was something extra in these scenes. At night, Peppa woke up to a strange crackling sound. The TV turned on by itself. It showed Mom, but with eyes that looked empty, erased, just for a second. In the morning, the scene repeated. Only Peppa noticed. During the day, everything seemed normal. No one believed Peppa's stories. A little later, she saw Daddy Pig. He wasn't blinking. He was just staring.
See, Daddy, you see, something's wrong.
Daddy Pig monotonously replied. We've all been here before. Peppa searched for an explanation. With each day, everything in the house became stranger. Peppa whispered,
Mom?
She answered emotionlessly.
Don't look for too long, Peppa. You'll see too much.
Daddy disappeared. The screen hummed as if it knew this would happen. Peppa decided to act. She pulled at the TV cord, but it sank into the floor and disappeared. The TV had never been plugged in, never before. Now it showed only fear and nothing else. On the screen, family members without faces, Peppa inside it. She screamed but made no sound. Peppa tore off George's toy hammer and struck the TV. The screen cracked. From inside, thick black liquid flowed out. Something unpleasant and dark seeped outward. The TV was gone, but distorted reflections remained. Some things don't turn off, even if the screen is no longer there. It all started as usual. Peppa and George were playing with Evie, Peppa's younger sister.
Evie, George, let's build the tallest tower,
suggested Peppa. Suddenly, Evie started complaining about stomach pain.
Don't worry, I'll help,
replied Mommy. Peppa and George looked at their sister with concern. Daddy Pig went to the kitchen for medicine. As he was about to return, suddenly the lights in the room went out.
Strange,
said Daddy Pig. Suddenly, a huge black hand appeared from the darkness and grabbed him. When Daddy Pig didn't come back, Mommy Pig called Dr. Rabbit. She began examining her, but suddenly black, thin tentacles appeared from Evie's mouth.
Help!
Screamed Dr. Rabbit as Evie grabbed her and dragged her out of the nursery. Peppa and George watched in horror, unable to do anything. Meanwhile, Mommy Pig went down to the hall and stumbled upon a cocoon made of tentacles, in which Daddy Pig was barely visible. Suddenly, everything went dark again, and a second cocoon appeared nearby, this time with Mommy Pig inside. Now only Peppa and George remained in the nursery. No one could help them. They heard Evie's whisper approaching the door.
Evie?
Asked a frightened Peppa, looking toward the door. She appeared with a grim smile and completely black eyes, saying,
Now you are my toys.
Peppa and George were playing hide and seek. Just like always, George chose a cozy spot, a little further than usual. Peppa was walking through an empty hall. The house seemed frozen in time. George was hiding well, too well. Mommy Pig was washing the dishes, but her movements were a bit slowed down.
Mommy, George isn't coming out.
He always plays like that.
Peppa felt the presence of something supernatural. The wardrobe where George was hiding was now closer than before. George was always nearby, but he wasn't here. The game of hide and seek had long since crossed into another realm. Peppa approached the window. There was George. He was outside, looking at Peppa and trying to get her attention. Turning around, Peppa noticed that George was also inside. She went outside. The yard was empty. The grass was pressed down, as if someone had just left. But now, in the window, there was her, the one who hadn't come out. Peppa decided to go back home. The door creaked as if someone was pulling it at the same time she did. Something in the house had changed, like it was shrinking. The wardrobe remained, but it no longer hid anything. Peppa entered the kitchen. George sat with his back to her at the table. He was waiting, but something was wrong. His face was blurred. He whispered, "You lose. The game was over." But had it ever really begun? Deleted Peppa Pig episode, The Living Toy. George loved his dinosaur, but that day, the toy fell into a place where it shouldn't have gone. George didn't know. Some toys find their owners on their own. When George disappeared, Peppa decided to look for him, but she had no idea. She would have to search not for her brother, but for what had taken him. The trail led to the nursery, where it all began. The door to the nursery swung open, and Peppa saw a giant dinosaur holding George in its claws.
Give him back!
Peppa shouted, but the dinosaur already knew his name. Peppa tried to rescue her brother, but the dinosaur swatted her away with its tail. George mumbled. His voice sounded strange, as if the dinosaur was learning how to be him. Peppa grabbed a toy hammer and struck the dinosaur's paw. It dropped George.
Run!
Peppa yelled, but George didn't move. His eyes turned red. In the morning, George returned, but Peppa saw that now the dinosaur was always watching him. At night, a voice was heard behind the door. "The little dinosaur. Mine." He waiting, because children can be lost so easily, especially when they think they've been found.